History Talk with Smith Co. Hello and welcome back to History Talk. Today we're going to be talking about some of the other movements that were actually being held in Ireland around the time there was a kind of Republican and Home Rule movement. So, you see, from the 1900s to 1914, there were kind of three main movements that had a big enough impact on Ireland. So you've got yourself the republicanism / home rule situation, but you also have socialism and feminism. So around this time, socialists become a little bit more popular in Ireland. So socialists are people who believe in that the society in Ireland was unfair because the rich had far more power than they needed and the poor had far less than they needed. So they wanted to redistribute all of the wealth of the rich to be able to enable the poor to actually have a decent sort of healthcare, education, housing system. Because while Ireland became a little bit more, it's not a socialist country to any extent, but it became a little bit more kind of close to this. Currently Ireland has free enough healthcare, and the education is somewhat affordable, and housing is not. Housing is a problem in Ireland in the modern day. It's not really. I mean, it's just overpriced, to be honest, and that's the issue. But so as you can see, socialism not really a big thing now in Ireland, or at least it's not, a thing that's there. But because at this time you couldn't just go, okay, we'll elect socialist, MPs, and then sure, we've got a socialist state. Because at the time, because socialism is in a way linked to a certain extent to kind of, home rule and everything. Because at the time, you can't just elect your socialist government. If there's a socialist party, you can't just elect them. Because if you elect them, they'll go to Westminster. But in Westminster, they'll be a minority. And, there's not much point there, So, basically, at this time, socialism appeals mainly to the workers in industry who are very badly paid and were unable to provide things for themselves. Now, two men began to develop socialism in Ireland. Those two men's names were James Connolly and James Larkin. Now, Connolly had come to Ireland in the 1890s, but he had very little success. In 1903, he left for the United States, and Larkin then arrived in 1907 to organise a trade union among dock workers in Belfast. However, unlike Connolly, Larkin had some success. However, he was hampered by the sort of the divisions between the nationalist and unionist workers, which actually made it very hard and almost impossible to get them to cooperate with each other. Then he moves to Dublin. He then sets up the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, or ITGWU. Quite a mouthful. In 1910, Connolly then returns from America to become the union's Belfast organiser. Then in 1913, they hold a strike against the Dublin Tramway Company. Now, this was controlled by a man named William Martin Murphy. Murphy, who actually hated Larkin and all that stood for him, not the best sort of situation you want to have when you're coming to talk to the union, to dislike everything the union leader stands for. Anyway, so he decides to unite all other employers and persuades them to lock out any workers who went on strike. Obviously, one could point out how kind of that's a foolish idea. You're locking out your workers for leaving. You're saying you can't return if you leave. I mean, it's a good enough argument, but it kind of, it just sort of, it does affect you badly as well. Anyway, so this lockout lasts through the winter of 1913, and into 1914, and ends in the defeat for the workers. During the strike, there is considerable violence from the police. Yeah, that's not a good tactic for the police to have. The police should not be like, oh, these are a bunch of workers. Their rights are not really there at all. So, what we're going to do is we're going to, side with the very rich factory and other owners, and we're going to just sort of use violence against them. That's not the best option. So, obviously, with no protection from the police, and in fact the police actually attacking them, Larkin and Connolly decided to form the Irish Citizen Army. It has around 200 members. These are both men and women. Then, when Larkin leaves for America again in 1914, Connolly takes over the leadership of both the ITGWU and the Citizen Army. Now, when war breaks out in Europe, he is reported to begin thinking about using this citizens' army to start a socialist revolution in Ireland. Now, there's also another movement going on at this time. So, in the early 1900s, women became more active in politics. They took part in all the political movements of the day, from nationalism to unionism to Sinn Féin and the labour movements. So, women of all shades of political opinion were also demanding that women be given full citizenship rights. Now, by the start of the 20th century, they'd won equality with men in education, and they could vote in local elections. But there were, of course, some issues with this. Because while you are allowed to vote, you still had some restrictions which were, some of these restrictions still apply to men, such as the property qualification. You aren't allowed to vote unless you own property. And other restrictions included the age. There's a slight age, fairly big actually, age difference between the age a man could vote and the age a woman could vote, and also the sort of issue of, just sort of a couple of issues there, quite a few that, would kind of say, you might have the right to vote in local elections, but, they could also not vote for an MP or even become an MP. Now, this meant that while they had some influence in the local government, they didn't have an influence in Parliament. And that's all well and good, having an influence in local government, but the fact is local government is, it's not very likely to be able to make many decisions that affect you in too many ways. So it's good enough, but it's not where the major decisions that affect you are going to be made. And when you're not able to elect anyone to represent you, and there is no one there to represent you, it's one thing to be like, okay, so you're not able to elect this person to represent you, but quite another to be like, oh no, that person, they don't exist. They can't go on the ballot. So, obviously, when only men are making decisions that affect all genders, you're going to find problems there. So, in 1908, Hannah Shirley Sheffington is a university graduate. She helps to found the Irish Women's Franchise League to campaign for the right to vote. Like the suffragettes in Britain, at the same time, she actually adopted a more violent and aggressive approach to their predecessors. You see, the issue of votes for women came to the fore after 1910, when it seemed likely that Ireland would actually get a home rule government. You see, if you look at it like this, if you go to Britain, and Britain is a very sexist country, so they're not going to vote for politicians who are going to support, equality. Because, it's a colonialist country, and if you have a colonialist country, what can you expect? But if Ireland has home rule, then, that puts a different shade in it. Because that means Ireland can have its own parliament. And if Ireland has its own parliament, then it can theoretically elect people who are pro-equality. I mean, all politicians should be pro-equality. You shouldn't be like having politicians that are not pro-equality. But, that's problems for you. So the issue, however, is this. If you say, Home Rule will give all Irish men the right to have a say in how your country is run, but how exactly do you then square that with, but that's like less than 50%, but that's less than 50% of the population. That's like 30% of the population you've got there. And actually less because of all the other restrictions. So only a very small majority, only a very small part of the country can actually vote. And obviously the question is, should this change? And surely it should. Well, when they asked the leaders of the Home Rule Party, they refused to discuss the issue. Now, the reasons they wanted to give, whether this is true or not, is that they didn't want to embarrass the British government. Yeah, embarrass the British government. Because, isn't it so embarrassing when, you accept that you're going to be equal? Yeah, that's such an embarrassing moment, isn't it? Those times, when you're talking to someone and you accidentally admit that you're willing to consider to be an equal government. So embarrassing, yeah. You just go totally red and you're just so embarrassed. It's awful, I mean, to think about that, Now, this was a government which was divided on the question of votes for women in the Parliament. So, Redmond, the Home Rule leader, just told women they must wait. Now, obviously, being told you must wait for you being treated equally is just a bit of a, it's a moron move, really. To be told that is just, you're thinking, this person's just told more, So then this provokes reaction from a small group of women, mainly in the IWFL. They heckled the speakers at a public meeting and smashed the windows in public buildings, and unfortunately for them, were sent to jail. But all these tactics won publicity. They unfortunately did not win sympathisers. And in 1914, the Home Rule Bill passed without women getting the right to vote. So obviously, fairly bad system to be having, But one person is, pretty active and pretty interesting. And that one is Constance Markievicz, and she's the person we'll be talking about in the next video. So please do join us then. Please do view other videos and, come back for the next one if that's what you want to do. Or just view other videos if you're not interested in these videos. And if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, you can do that as well. That helps. Anyway, hopefully we will see you next time. Or on other videos. If we don't, enjoy the rest of your existence. And I guess I'll have to say this. Bye bye.